Well, we're continuing to follow the coming invasion of Haiti by the United States government, trying to create their coalition of the willing. Antony Blinken in Canada over the weekend trying to drum up support for that. We have a Western media narrative that's unfolding, trying to push this cholera outbreak perhaps as a pretext for invasion. Joining us from Uncaptured Media is Dan Cohen. He is back to explain what the very latest is in Haiti. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you.
So what is the latest? Over the weekend, we saw Antony Blinken up in Canada trying to drum up support for an invasion. Can you bring us the very latest on that side of it?
Yeah, so Blinken has been kind of striking out at the United Nations. The UN, basically, the U.S. and Mexico co-authored a second resolution in the United Nations Security Council calling for military intervention. And that seems to be gaining little support, particularly from Russia and China. So the U.S. is essentially seeking to deputize through the UN Security Council a UN member state to go in and carry out a sort of covert military intervention itself. So Blinken went to Canada over the weekend, and he came away basically empty-handed. He was hoping to get some kind of agreement from Trudeau to send in a covert military force, but all they agreed to is to send basically a fact-finding mission, which is ongoing at this point. So now it seems that the U.S. is looking to other kind of multilateral institutions. First and foremost, the Organization of American States, but because of the presence of progressive governments that do not want military intervention in their region, that seems to be falling on its face. And then you have CARICOM, which is where the kind of diplomatic battle is playing out right now. The Bahamas have said that they would send forces to invade Haiti, but there are other countries like St. Vincent and the Grenadines that are very staunchly anti-imperialist. So we just kind of have to see how that battle unfolds inside CARICOM and what the U.S. might do in the case that fails too.
So on the UN sanctions this week, so this is another big piece of the story. Of course, we saw the United Nations this week putting on further sanctions against Jimmy Cherizier, aka Barbecue, the opposition leader there, who's been blocking the fuel depot, the fuel port there. What is the very latest from the United Nations on these sanctions, and what were they hoping to accomplish? Him to release the fuel and that this would all then magically go away?
Right, exactly. So the U.S. and UN thought, these sanctions will send some kind of strong message to compel Barbecue to release the blockade on the fuel terminal, but that clearly hasn't happened. I don't know how much impact these sanctions directly have on Barbecue. It's not as if he's traveling all over the world or has money in financial institutions overseas. And he's already been under U.S. Magnitsky sanctions since 2020. So I think these sanctions, the U.S. was hoping, were a prelude to military invasion of sorts, which is, of course, what they're gunning for now. And in the UN resolution that was passed, in negotiations, the clause calling for military intervention actually was struck. So again, the U.S. really just kind of falling, its plans not exactly working through multilateral institutions like the UN. But the blockade on the fuel terminal continues, and I think even more importantly, the fuel hikes that the IMF or that the Ariel Henry government imposed on behalf of the IMF, which is essentially the U.S., those remain, and that's the real fundamental problem, not the fuel blockade. The fuel blockade just means, well, if none of the masses can get gas, why should the ultra wealthy? Why should the government, this de facto puppet prime minister, be allowed to stay in power?
And that's really the heart of this, right? The idea, of course, is that, as you pointed out here on the show before, that the Haitian people don't really care about the fuel blockade at all because they don't have access. They can't afford the fuel in the first place. And so this blockade is really a representative, sort of a symbolic move to keep the fuel away from the hands of the ruling elite, which can afford the $30 a gallon, and where the Haitian people cannot afford this. So this is really the Haitian people saying, hey, yeah, absolutely, keep this blockade in place, because what it's really doing is affecting this puppet government and these ruling elites. And we don't get any of this anyway. We don't get the scraps. We can't afford gas. We're making $5 a day. Is that kind of at the heart of this issue?
Exactly. Haitian masses live in literal sewage, in neighborhoods like La Saline and Cité du Soleil, these complete slums that the U.S. and the oligarchs in Haiti have never cared about. And that's where they make incredible amounts of profit in their sweatshops and in their factories. And so suddenly, all of a sudden, we're supposed to believe that Anthony Blinken and these oligarchs in the hills in Port-au-Prince suddenly care about the Haitian masses that are living in literal sewage. It's obvious that it's a farce, and we're going to see kind of who exactly is in power here.
So let's talk about the military invasion piece of this. Of course, a couple of weeks ago, we reported Coast Guard cutter ships, now patrolling, of course, near Port-au-Prince. What is the very latest on the actual, military invasion piece of this? Boots on the ground. Now that the United Nations has given the go-ahead for this, when do we expect to see U.S. forces, actual soldiers on the ground? Do you have any insight into that? Or not like they're going to telegraph and tell us when this is happening, but what are your sources saying on this part?
Well, it was reported actually in the Miami Herald from Brian Nichols, the top State Department official for the region, that the U.S. wants a military intervention in early November. And I suspect that early November means, after November 7th, midterm elections, because it's not going to look good for Democrats and the Biden administration to be sending boots on the ground, to be getting involved in some other boondoggle in another country, particularly with how poorly, of course, the Afghanistan exit went, and the U.S. is just up to its neck in Ukraine. So I think basically right after midterm elections, we're going to see things heat up a lot. And the U.S. is just looking at any way it can to get troops in there.
So the end game, it seems, for the United States and the United Nations is to not care about the actual violent criminals, but to instead focus on the one ray of sunshine, perhaps the one ray of hope, in the opposition leader in Jimmy Cherizier, a.k.a. Barbecue, who's been blocking the fuel ports. And he is the biggest thorn in the side of the United Nations in the U.S., right? Who the United States wants to continue their sweatshop labor, wants to continue their puppet government. And is that at the heart of it? Is that the main reason for putting boots on the ground, is to try to stop him and his supporting forces?
Exactly. I mean, it obviously has nothing to do with the horrible conditions people are living in. It has obviously nothing to do with, so-called gang violence, which is real. I mean, there are numerous criminals, very violent criminals that I could point to. Izzo, leader of the 15 Seconds gang, who notorious for beheading and burning bodies and killing and kidnapping. You could look at T. La Plie, leader of the Grand Ravine gang, who's a big kidnapper. You could look at the 400 Mao Zedong, who kidnapped 17 North American missionaries in 2021. He's not under sanctions. He's not under, he's not being talked about by Brian Nichols or the UN or anyone. So it's not about gang violence. It's about the guy who is fighting those criminals. It's about, basically Haiti's Robin Hood, who's going against, these horrible armed groups that commit vicious crimes against innocent people and making huge amounts of money doing it on behalf of the oligarchs. So it's about maintaining the status quo of instability and chaos and, maximizing profits, and also preventing Haiti from falling out of the U.S. grip. Because, if Haiti goes, what happens to the Dominican Republic? What happens to Puerto Rico? So there could be some kind of domino effect, even on the geopolitical chessboard.
Whenever we have one of these invasions, right, the U.S. also often has members of the intelligence state. They have special forces that have been there for many, many months, for in fact, many, many years. What is your reporting telling you on that? Because clearly, if they're about to fully mount an invasion here in the next few weeks, right after the midterm elections, they've got forward operating forces that have been there. What have you been hearing from your sources? Are they seeing any Americans sort of sniffing around?
I haven't heard anything about American special forces or anything like that. though I would not doubt the presence. There are so-called police trainers that have been ongoing, but there's also a very heavy military presence in the Dominican Republic up in the on the border. So in terms of actual U.S. special forces or CIA or anything like that, I wouldn't doubt that they're there, but I don't actually know that they are. So, that kind of remains to be seen. But certainly the U.S. wants to deploy those kind of JSOC special ops forces.
Clearly. Well, you're going to be down there I think you're leaving in the next short amount of time. You'll be down in Haiti with a report. So boots on the ground. We'll get to see you there. And you're going to be bringing us a report for Redacted, which will be great. We'll get to see through your eyes instead of, as I said before, through intermediaries. We'll get to see what's actually happening there, the truth on the ground, not being told to us from the Western media. And really, no one is covering this story. It's remarkable to get any sort of Western media coverage of the story. It's very few and far between. So we thank you for that. And you have a brand new documentary as well that's about to launch. Can you tell us about the new documentary and where can people find it?
Yeah, it's all happening at the same time. We're headed down right as this to Port-au-Prince, right as the documentary is going to be released. So the documentary is called Another Vision: Inside Haiti's Uprising. It basically tells the story of the rise of Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier and his armed federation called the G9. And it's 3 episodes. It gives the whole backstory to the current moment. So it's almost as if the current moment, this U.S. intervention, could be like a 4th episode. So that's what our reporting is going to be. But we'll have that out within 24 hours. And we hope everyone will watch. And you'll see reporting and journalism, investigative journalism that you just can't see anywhere else. So looking forward to getting the documentary out and doing these reports with Redacted.
Well, our thanks to you, man, for doing amazing journalism and for having the bravado and the bravery to go down there and to be able to cover this story. So we need more independent journalists like yourself for doing these stories. So Dan, thanks as always. We'll link it up in the description, and we will see you from Haiti in our next report.
Thanks a lot, Clayton. Looking forward to it.
And what's interesting is that Dan was saying that the cell towers down there, I mean, they're all powered by fuel, right? So like cell phone spottiness, $30, $30 a gallon for fuel right now. This is not a poor person's fuel. Like this is, again, it's all of the elites who have access to this fuel. So the United States, the Western media continuing to spin this story. Actually, I should say the Western media not even covering this story at all.
No.
We are one of the few organizations covering it, and Dan's doing an amazing job with us as well on this story. So it's an incredibly important story, and no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing to see that this invasion is going to happen just right after the election, right after the midterms. Like, this is when we're actually going to see more of a U.S. presence and military, because they just don't want to rock their boat.
Or will not, depending on who is voted in. So
true, but
although both parties seem to have an appetite for war.
Yeah, they're going to continue on that.
Yeah. I mean, we can parse out like censorship and, gender issues and that kind of thing, but war, bipartisan.
What is it good for? So yeah, Dan will be down there for Redacted. We're excited to be able to bring that to you on this channel.